And here we are again, live from beautiful downtown Oakland, California, and beautiful downtown Los Angeles, California, and beautiful downtown Sydney, Australia, and God knows where else. We're all over the place. We don't even know. But welcome to another Talk Within the Nine-Sided Circle with your hosts, Noor Kyle and Mushtaq Ali. And we are tonight going to be discussing something that I was thinking about today, and I figured, why not make it a topic? We're calling it the 7 lines of the work. And it is something that I originally learned from studying with Mr. Bennett. So it's kind of out of a Gurdjieffian sort of tradition, but I found it a useful tool for organizing. But before we get into that, since this is going to be put up on YouTube, let me go through my usual routine of telling you, hey, like our video, hit that like button there, that thumbs up, and give us a good ego hit, a nice little dopamine rush by seeing that you like us. Or hit the thumbs down and make us feel really bad and terrible, but we'll get over it because we're that kind of people. And subscribe to our channel because we would like subscriptions. We don't have 100 people subscribed yet, and that's my first goal, is get to 100. I don't know why. I mean, there's nothing particularly special about 100 people, but it's a nice round number.
Yeah.
Is 100 a round number? Yeah, it must be, because 101 is an unround number. So a nice round number. And hit the little notification bell, and you'll find out every time we upload something interesting or boring, or just totally absurd, because we will do all three at one time or another. And so if you're new here and you're watching this on the rerun, welcome. And welcome to our regular crowd. And with no further ado, let us leap right in and discuss the 7 lines of work. Now, the way I think about this is, let me give you the Mr. Bennett's names for the lines of work first. He called them assimilation, struggle, service, manifestation, receptivity, submission, and purity. You didn't know that we were going to get into purity here. And each of these lines is associated with something specific that is illustrative of the way it works. Assimilation is the first line of work. Assimilation is active, and it moves from the outside to the inside. The outside is actively giving to you. And this is the practice, or the area of practice for this first line of work, is breath. Because breath comes in from the outside. And it keeps you alive. So the first thing that happens is you use your breath, you use the breath practices to connect you to the world, because that's kind of what it does. So I'm going to go through these in brief, and then we will go back and discuss them at length, and I'm sure there will be questions. The second line of work, which Mr. Bennett calls struggle, is the work of the body. And it is active, and it moves from the inside to the outside. And it is specifically work on self, because body and self are kind of the same thing. The third line of work, like I said, is called service. And it's emotional work, and it is also active, and it moves from the inside. Excuse me, struggle moves from the inside to the inside. Let me correct that for a second. So, starts from the inside, ends in the inside. That's why we call it work on self.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I thought that was.
Yeah, that's just me getting ahead of myself.
You know, lots going on over here. So, okay, onward.
Service is emotional work, and it is from the inside to the outside. So service starts inwardly and manifests outwardly, and it is the work of community. The fourth line of the work is called manifestation, and it is the work of the mind, and it is reconciling rather than active. It is both inside and outside simultaneously, and it is action. So it's not moving from one to the other or from the other back to the first. It is both acting simultaneously. Now, number 5 is receptivity. And this is the work of the magnetic center. And it's receptive. And it takes from the outside and gives to the inside, as opposed to actively pushing in assimilation. It's passively receiving. And this is also part of the work of the community. Submission is the 6th line of work, and it is related to the higher emotional center, and it's receptive, and it is the outside receives from inside. And again, this has to do with self. The 7th line of work is called purity, and it's the work of the higher mind, the higher head center, and it's also receptive. It is from the outside to the inside, and it has to do with the world. And you could say the inside receives from the outside in this one, as opposed to the one before, the outside receives from the inside. It's inelegantly put, but hopefully it will all make sense later. So does this all sort of, here we are, kind of, you understand what I said so far?
David gave a thumbs up.
Okay.
I understand the words. I don't understand what they're getting at.
Well, of course not. I do that just to bother you. All right, so then let's cycle back up and talk about the first line of work, which is assimilation. This is active from the outside to the inside, actively moving, as opposed to actively receiving. That doesn't make sense. Does that make sense? Actively, yeah, this is actively giving rather than actively receiving. Going through my notes here. So, one of the things that happens here is that the student comes in and he starts the lines of work. And the first thing that you do is you sit down and you take your student and you teach her how to breathe. You say, I want you to do this practice. And I want you to do it while all of this stuff is going on. So when you get a question, I want you to sit and breathe through the question. Just hold the question in your mind and breathe through it to see how it formulates in yourself. And one is actively using breath to connect self and world, if that makes sense. And so all of the information that is going on is going to be mediated through this process of being awake in your breath. And the idea of assimilation is that you are actively receiving input from the outside. And you are taking the information and finding out how it fits within you. Does it fit within you? And on the Enneagram, this is like the first couple of points, the 1 and the 2. So if you were doing this right now, I am giving you this information. And your monkey mind is going to jump in and go, yeah, what about this? What about that? What about this other thing? And the great sheikh of the Hanukkah would be sitting there going, okay, breathe through all of these responses to the question. Sit with them. Let them, let yourself receive the information. Notice what the information mechanically stimulates in you, and just pay attention. Make sense, sort of?
Got a thumbs up. I didn't realize my mic was on. Type. But yes.
Yeah.
Omar's on board.
All right. So let us look then at point 2, struggle. This is related to your body, to your moving center, to your instinctual center, and to your sexual center. Those 3 centers that are in the moving center, that are body oriented, that are connected to the first brain, as the Gurdjieffians would say. And the second line of work has to do with physicality, with actually working on yourself through working on your body. And this means that you learn to repattern some of the habitual positions that you put yourself in. Like right now, all of you are sitting in a particular way. And I would suggest to you that oftentimes, not every time, but oftentimes, that way will be associated with a particular kind of thinking. And so the teacher of the school would say, all right, I want you to all sit in this particularly odd position that is not related to any of your habitual postures. They would say, I want you to do these physical exercises to open up kinetic chains within your body that have been closed. I want you to free your fascia from the adhesions it has to your muscles. I want you to find the places where you habitually go to maintain your balance and learn to maintain balance in other places. And all of these are struggle. And the struggle is not so much physical as it becomes almost emotional, in that you are insisting that you step out of habitual ways of thinking, using the body as a tool. I can guarantee you that you will not think the same way. You have your habitual ways, for instance, of sitting and listening to me talk. If you were all standing on one foot with the other leg crossed across your knee and your hands behind your head like this, you would not be thinking in the same way as you're thinking as you're sitting here and listening to me talk. You would mostly be thinking, oh my God, I'm going to fall over. But after you got over that part, this part of the work is also the struggle to be healthy. And I don't know why it's a struggle to be healthy, but it certainly is anymore. But if you are not healthy, it is difficult to do the work. Does that make sense?
I think it does. Omar thinks it does. Yep.
Okay, any questions before we move on to the next one?
What point would this be?
On the Enneagram?
Mhm.
It's not exactly a point on the Enneagram, though you can map it on an octave. So it starts out with Do at 1. Physical is Re at 2. Now we're getting to Mi, and we're looking at the infamous Mi-Fa interval. So you can map it on an Enneagram by mapping the octave points of the Enneagram. But I don't usually think of this as an Enneagram because it's not the most efficient way to look at this process in my experience.
The Enneagram isn't, you mean?
Yeah, the Enneagram isn't.
Mm.
Because this is more conceptual than process oriented.
Oh, yeah. Yep. Ideas in a list.
Yes.
Yeah.
So point 3 is called service. And it is the work of the emotional center. This is active from the inside to the outside, and it has to do with community. Now, service work. Service is a word that is thrown around a lot. And in my humble opinion, it is the most misused word in the spiritual vocabulary.
How so?
Well, it's often used as a form of manipulation. I remember early on having a teacher say, she used to say all the time, the most important thing is service to others. Everybody should be in service to others. And I thought about that, and I went, okay, why? And I never got a good answer to that. And what is it about the other that they need service so much? So I'm going to give you a radical departure on the idea of service. Service is not service to others. Service to others is oftentimes a form of enslavement for both the server and the served. this is going to upset some people, and
Mm.
I'm cool with that. Service is about service to, and service is not about service to God. The ultimate divine creative force of the universe has no need for a butler, has no need for a housemaid, has no need for anything. And the divine reality has no need for a servant. So, if service to others is a form of trapping yourself in a game, and service to God is as pointless an exercise as you could take on. Service to God is kind of like, God, I can't even think of a good enough simile for it. It'll come to me as soon as I find something absurd enough.
Yeah, okay.
But yeah, service to God is absurd, is what it is, because God, by definition, has no need of servants. That which can do all has no need for that which can do for it, nor could you do for it anyway.
So what is service really about then?
Service is about, and this is just my point of view, which is, as anybody who disagrees with me will tell you, is completely wrong. But service is about the work of aligning yourself with the universal harmony. And I think of that as service to the path, service to the work, service in the sense of your job is not to go out and clean somebody's house, but it is to be an example of what it is to be an awake human being in the world. That is real service.
And that's not to disparage helping others. It's just,
Now, helping somebody who needs help would probably be a manifestation of that.
yep.
But what I have seen over decades of hanging out with various teachers and gurus and sheikhs and everything is that what you get is this mechanical, oh, we must be of service thing. And it's not that. It's something completely different from that. And the mechanical service will keep you trapped. Real service, which is to manifest the path within you, is freeing. So let me give you an example of two different things. You go to a teacher, and the teacher says, today you are going to get closer to God by being of service. So you're going to clean my garage.
Mhm.
Versus you go to a teacher and the teacher says, come with me. And the teacher goes to the local soup kitchen and begins helping to cook and prepare meals and goes out and maybe buys some food. And he doesn't even tell the student what to do. The student is just sitting there watching. And at some point, the student will go, oh, I could wash these pans. You see the difference between those two things? Yes, no, maybe?
Omar says yes.
Somebody talk to me about the difference between those two things.
Omar, what are you picking up?
On the one case, you're acting almost under coercion of somebody whom you consider to be kind of your superior to do something which you don't have a natural inclination to do. In the other case, you're beginning to acquire a natural inclination to do something which presumably helps you to extrovert from your own interiority into the world.
Yes. And along with that, which is absolutely and completely 100% accurate, the teacher's ego is not involved. When you clean the teacher's garage for them, that's their ego. When the teacher goes out and prepares food just because it's necessary to be done, then that is a demonstration of the path. And it is not asking the student to serve the teacher's ego. I learned this lesson from a witch, by the way. And it was a very, very fun lesson.
So tell us about it. That sounds fascinating. Which is that?
There is a woman, we will call her Thorn. And everybody knows her as this great teacher, right? And I had never met her, but we had a lot of friends in common, and they kept saying, you two need to get together. You two need to get together. You would really like each other. You need to sit and talk. And so I got to San Francisco. I was living back east at the time, and I came out and visit. And our friends arranged for us to meet. And so Thorne said, you can meet me here. And so I go to this place, and it's a soup kitchen. And she's just in there preparing food for people who need it. Nobody knows that she does this. She makes no deal about this at all. This is just what she does. She doesn't advertise. She doesn't go, oh, come with me and help at the soup kitchen or anything like that. And I looked at her, and I felt what was going on. And she was working from such a place of literal pure service, and not service to the people she was feeding, but service to the work, that just being around her kind of made me a better person, which is hard to do. Trust me, I don't become a better person easily. And so when I think of this particular thing, I think of her, because it was one of the most exquisite examples of real service that I had experienced in a very long time, and one that had no ego at all involved with it that I could tell. And then we had a pleasant walk around San Francisco and visited one of my favorite bookstores and had a great time, and we became good friends.
Yay.
Yeah. And I still admire her work. She does some of the best social justice work out there.
Writes a good book too.
Writes a good book too, yeah. So that's an example of real service versus clean my garage. And it's not only clean my garage, and this didn't happen to me, but it happened to somebody I knew who went to see a guru. It's like, you're going to pay me $500 for a weekend's worth of teaching. 85% of that teaching is you cleaning my garage. Now, maybe some people might need that for a bit of ego reduction, but
I mean, I was going to point that out earlier. I didn't have the opportunity to say it. I figured it would come up when the time is right. But yeah,
yeah.
people do need that, but it's not a good primary strategy.
No, and this was for the person who was getting his garage cleaned. This was a primary strategy.
Yeah.
He was noted for abusing his students under the name of service to the guru.
Boo. Boo
Yep.
to that.
So we have that. Now, the fourth line of work, manifestation, is the work of the intellectual center, the mind center. And this is the reconciling point of this entire octave energetically. And so it is both inside and outside. It is neither active nor passive. It is reconciling. So it is the superposition to active and passive. It is neither yes nor no, but it could be maybe. And at this point, you are using your mental faculties to create your particular path within the work. And using your mind to determine the actions that you need to take for your further advancement. You can't start off with this because you got to clean everything up before you get here. And a lot of this will involve a certain amount of mental learning. And that specifically, learning how to think. And it is my contention that most people don't know how to think. Or I should say many people don't. Many people who I have known personally do not actually know how to think. They cannot manage a logical thought train, which is a shame. Because this is usually not something that happens automatically. It is not intuitive to use your mind. Does that make sense?
I think so. I'm just curious, does this include intuition, or is it purely like intellectual?
This is purely intellectual at this point.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to get to intuition in just a little bit, the real intuition. But this is more the rational faculties. This is actually using your mind to reason. And reason is a much maligned but very important thing. First, you have to get your emotions under control, though, which is why the feeling comes before this. Do you know why that is? Because emotion will always overpower reason. No matter how good you are at logic, no matter how good you are at reason, strong emotion will dislocate it. So you must first learn to bring your emotions under a kind of control, which also happens through the right kind of service, before you can really begin to use reason as a guiding mechanism. One of the most important parts of reason as a guiding mechanism, and this is why it's the reconciling force, is that reason can allow you to see into the future. Whereas emotion will not give you a look into the future. Do you understand what I mean by that?
Is emotion typically more a reaction rather than?
Emotion is definitely more reaction, and it is immediate. It has to do with immediacy. Whereas reason, for instance, some people rob banks. Some bank robbers get caught and thrown in jail. Therefore, if I rob a bank, I am liable to be caught and thrown in jail. That is a very simplistic line of reasoning, and yet it can give you a certain amount of guidance if you're thinking about bank robbing and your future as a bank robber. Now, if you're thinking with your emotions, what you do is you make yourself a picture sitting around like Scrooge McDuck with a whole pile of money. And you're throwing it in the air and you're feeling really good, and the oxytocin and the dopamine is all getting released into your brain and life is good. But your reason goes, wait a minute. Of all the crimes committed in America, the police, specifically the FBI, is really, really good at catching bank robbers. Therefore, the odds of me being caught as a bank robber are very high in comparison to any other way I might make money. The odds of being thrown in jail for working at McDonald's are very, 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 very low. So far, working at McDonald's, morally it might be a crime, but legally it's not. But robbing a bank will get you thrown in jail more often than not. And so your reason allows you to see into the future and make a choice that is not related to emotional fantasies. And it's kind of weird because right now, reason is getting beat up in the world. People are going, oh, reason is of the patriarchy. That's the last one I heard, even though the three best logicians I know are all women. You know, people talk about reason being of the patriarchy, and that's emotional and stupid. Let me put that bluntly. Reason does not have gender. Women and men are equally capable of using reason and logic and higher order thinking, and equally fail at doing so. So this line of the work has to do with learning to use your mind for that which it was intended, which is to see into the future and plot your course in a way that will not get you into trouble. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. I wanted to push a little bit on the point, what may just be an extension of the point that Kyle was making about intuition earlier. I mean, what you're describing is really kind of a process of reasoning. Okay.
Yes.
And I wonder whether you also include in this same point four, I guess it is, the result of that reasoning, which often to me is sort of, you know, now I've used rational thought to clear away confusions, and now I get this sort of gestalt of the way that makes something makes sense, which is not a syllogistic process itself. It's rather kind of an outcome of clearing away the debris. Or
yes, and I actually put that in a different spot on this octave.
Okay.
Because I consider that a higher order thinking.
Okay, cool.
Where your unconscious mind does the reasoning process for you and then produces the result for your amusement.
Okay, cool.
Yep, we're not abandoning that. It's just,
No, because that's actually very important.
Yeah.
And we will get to that in 2 points, 3 points. That's the highest order of that. So the fifth line of the work is called receptivity. And this is taking from the outside and giving to the inside. The inside receives from the outside. And this has to do, again, with community. Just as service has to do with community, receptivity has to do with community. And this is very high order stuff. When I was in my first Sufi school, back when I was but a mere lad, one of the rules there was that the new dervishes were not allowed to work. They were not allowed to do the dishes or help with the cooking or serve the tea or even sweep the floors. Which seems kind of odd, yes? Why would this be the case?
Would it be to offer opportunities to sit and watch and learn?
To a certain extent, yeah.
Yeah, it almost seems like a process of being received and integrated into the community rather than, and that's more like a, your come will welcome you type thing rather than, we'll put you through this initiatory testing.
And that's definitely part of it. The basic thing, as it was explained to me, is one, you don't know how to be of service yet. You would not do this well. Sit and learn to receive our service gracefully. Do not belittle yourself and think that you are not worthy of being the guest. Do not exalt yourself and think that you are worthy of being served. Learn to receive as a duty. It took me a day or two to get my mind around that. Yeah, a few days, a lot of days. It took a while. But I realized after hanging out there for a while that the servers were like the most advanced students in the place. So the people who were the really high level students weren't like all exalted and sitting around and dispensing wisdom. They were serving tea and preparing food and polishing people's shoes and whatever needed to be done as their practice, as part of their practice. And they weren't doing it for the teacher. They weren't doing it for the other students. They were doing it as a matter of intentional service to the path. And it's kind of an odd thing where you're sitting there thinking, boy, I hope that someday I can be developed enough that they will allow me to clean the toilets and sweep the floor. Because it's very different than the American way of thinking of things. Of one day I want to be so developed that I can be the teacher of all of these things. Mm-hmm. Just no, if you're that developed, you're cleaning the toilets.
I don't know, it does take some skill to do a good job.
It takes real skill to do a good job. And then you get really motivated because real teachers teach by example.
Yep.
I remember Sheikh Tanner one day, I'd look out in the yard and he had gotten his kids a dog. And He's out there and he's cleaning up dog shit. And I'm like running out horrified going, Shake, what are you doing? Let me do this for you. And he's like, why should I be anybody special? So there were a few lessons in that. The first was, just because you are the high level, totally enlightened being, doesn't mean you're too good to pick up dog shit. The second lesson was, I need to pay enough attention to what's going on that he never sees the dog shit and goes out and picks it up. 2 lessons in 1. So the magnetic center is the connection between what we call the lower centers, the moving, the emotional, and the intellectual center, and the higher emotional and the higher intellectual center. And in usual times, these 2 sections of you are not connected. They're separated. The bridge between them has been broken or not installed. And so if you want your centers working together and working harmoniously, you have to build this thing that Mr. Gurdjieff called the magnetic center, which acts as the conduit between the lower and the higher. They're not really lower and higher, at least in my estimation, but they are disconnected as a matter of course, unless you do the work. And receptivity, being able to receive from the community, being open to not just the community doing for you, but the community giving you the impressions that you need in order to develop. And in order to get that, you literally have to create this thing that's, I think of it like a little magnet in your chest that is pulling these experiences into you, allowing you to receive them. You are the passive pole in this, and the community is the active pole. Hence my example of the tea servers and the dervishes of service, as we used to call them. Does that make sense so far? Do I need to clarify this more? It won't hurt my feelings if I do, because I've never given this talk, right? I just went, I should talk about this today.
How you feeling about this one, Omar?
It seems clear what's arising for me, and I'm wondering if it's connected or it may just simply be a sideline. Right? There's a real issue sometimes in connecting sort of the universal self with the individual presence in the world. And I'm wondering, would that have anything to do with this higher and lower center being connected via this magnetic center? Because I don't have a real feel for this, what you're referring to as the magnetic center. And
yeah, it's perhaps an inelegant term. I use it because people within the Gurdjieffian schools understand what it means. And it is, it's the grain of sand that is placed in your shell that allows the pearl of the permanent eye to form around it. So yeah, it does connect the individual and the universal. That's actually a moderately good way to talk about it, I think. Perhaps better than the way I was talking about it.
Because it seems like it's what you're manifesting this, well, the one self, so to speak, in a particular instance which is going to be active in the world. But I mean, I'm not sure that's really what you're getting at, though. So I don't want to push it.
And this is something we're all working out together here. We're all figuring out. I mean, I understand this from years and years of having it pounded into my head by people much smarter than me. And it doesn't mean that I can put it forth as elegantly or with as big a hammer as they did. So we're creating the understanding as we go.
Mm-hmm.
So let's look at the next one, because this is another one, submission. And this is the work of the higher emotional center, higher emotional work, and it's receptive. And this is the inside to the outside. Now, submission is another one of those incredibly abused terms. You must submit yourself to the master, which is great for the master. But submission is never to a person. I will submit to you that Sufi teachers, the real ones, do not want followers who are submitted to them. What you submit yourself to is the flow of the universal being. That sounds very airheaded.
Woo, so weird.
How do I say this? I don't want to say you submit yourself to God, because that is not entirely right in the way that it is used today. Because as I see that, it's the priest says, you must submit yourself to God. And the follower goes, okay. And then the priest says, this is what God wants you to do. So shut up and do it. Be a good submissive servant of God. But the priest is always the intermediary. Or the lawyer. Yeah, if you're a Christian, you got to deal with the priests. If you're a Muslim, you deal with the lawyers. There are no priests in Islam. The lawyers snuck in instead. But it's always people telling you what God's will is that you must submit to. So I don't like using the term God, because it isn't that. There is no divine set of rules that you have to follow. Submission is surrendering yourself to the universal flow. And I know that sounds airheaded, but I can't think of a better way to say it. Can anybody think of a better way to say that? Zainab, help me out here. We surrender ourselves to the noises in the park. Do you have any ideas?
Not at the moment.
Okay, if something comes up, tell us, because
Okay.
these last two I struggle with trying to explain them. I have the internal feeling for them, but my word forms are not as elegant as I would like them to be. So the inside offers, the inside you, the ego, the I, offers surrender to the universality of being, that thing that Ibn al-Arabi talks about, the oneness of being. That's probably the best way to describe this, because you're going, not to. This is the true Advaita, not to.
Yeah.
There is not you and me. there is the one.
So when you submit to that, what is that purpose? What is the purpose there?
The purpose there is to align yourself with the universal intention. What is the intention of the oneness of being?
I mean, experientially, at least for me, it happens in what I guess what you previously called mindfulness type meditation, where it's almost like a relaxation of your idea of the self into this broader awareness, I guess. And it's that relaxation past the individual persona that you seem to be pointing at here.
I would say that that's exactly right.
Okay.
Yeah, that is a very good way of describing this. What he said. Write that down. We're going to steal it from him. And that gets us to the last bit.
Oh, we have a couple comments I want to
Okay.
touch on.
Yeah, touch on the comments, please.
But first, I want to, Ilmar, you just said something really great, and I want to make sure that I encapsulate it. So you were saying, like, you know, I guess getting in tune with.
It's not so much getting tuned. I mean, at least one type of experience that I had is it's almost a relaxation of this
Oh, yeah. Yes.
identification
Yeah.
with the constructed persona.
Mhm.
And as that relaxes, and I mean, there's still, in some sense, I'm there, but it's not the persona Ilmar that's there. That's doing
Yeah.
And that's the closest experience I have to what Mushtaq is talking about here.
Yeah, and that's pretty accurate. I use I use a martial metaphor actually. In somebody is giving me energy, like trying to make me fall onto the ground, grabbing you and you're grappling. If I resist that, it creates much great stress and much great ego. If I totally surrender to that energy in just the right way, they fall down instead of me.
Mm.
And it is, as Professor Washiva said, you are just bringing the universe into harmony.
Yeah.
So,
Forgive me if I don't do precise, you know, iteration of that. I'm trying to do like 3 things at once, but
yeah,
I value what you said, so thank you.
yeah, that was a really good way to describe it.
Okay, so beyond that, David says, is submission like taking a hint? I mean, kind of, right?
Kind of. It's more like receiving a hint.
Mm. Zainab says, reminds me of sajda during prayers.
Yeah. Sajda is where you bow down to the ground.
Yep.
And it is kind of like that. That's what it's supposed to be in the prayer. Because, trust me, God does not need you to pound your head on the ground. Right?
Mm.
This is not a necessity for God's ego that you should be pounding your head on the ground and going, oh God, you're so cool. Oh God, you're so cool. Sajda, that position is to allow yourself to be completely surrendered to that which is greater. And in the East, that's the position that you do it. So it makes sense, especially in that particular perspective.
So I think we can safely move on to the last one, yeah?
Yes, the last one, 7, purity. Purity is the higher intellectual center. This is where real intuition takes place. This is where your symbol systems are very highly developed, and you can do rational thought completely unconsciously. And to me, it manifests as I am contemplating something and I just know the answer. And I don't need to even know how I get to the answer. I just know the answer is right. But if I take and I deconstruct the answer, I can actually create the steps to create the symbols and the syllogism that shows the rationality of that move. But at this point, it happens at a much, much higher level and pulls in more information than my conscious mind could pull in, if that makes sense. And the reason that it's called purity is because you have to have burned away all of the dross in order to get here. Every bit of crud that's stuck to the inside of your mind or stuck to the inside of your emotions inhibits this process. And so it is purification as in an alchemist's fire. You all understand how the alchemical process works?
Why don't you share a little bit about that?
Let me tell you how it works, very, very basically. You have a thing, a substance. Let's say it's a plant. Let's say it is Melissia officinalis, which is known commonly as lemon balm, a member of the mint family, which is a nootropic plant that actually increases intelligence, calms the mind, and is very good for you. So if you're an alchemist, you look at this plant and go, okay, within this plant, there is the pure essence of what does this, and there is all of this extraneous stuff. And I want the pure essence. And they go about that by realizing that the plant has three constituents, which in alchemy are referred to as the mercury, the sulfur, and the salt. The salt represents physical matter, right? In the plant, that would be the carbons, the cellulose, all of that kind of stuff, the carbon-based stuff. The sulfur represents the volatile fractions. So the oils of the plant would be considered part of the sulfur. And the mercury represents the spirit of the plant, the spiritual essence of the plant, which is the life force of it. All three of these are combined to make a living plant. An alchemist would separate the plant into those three elements and then purify each of the elements of its dross. Dross is a term that actually comes from alchemy. Removing the impurities until you have the most pure aspect of each of these, of the mercury, the sulfur, and the salt of the plant. And then the alchemist would recombine them into what is known as the stone of the plant. This would be the philosopher's stone. And when you do plant alchemy like this, what you get is this substance that looks usually kind of like amber and will melt on glass, but not smoke, and then re-solidify. And it is the absolute essence of the medicinal quality of the plant. And it goes through a lot of steps to get there, which we don't need to go into, but this is the alchemical process. Wish Dave was here for this, because yeah, he does a form of this with people's bodies.
So what
yes?
is the purity that's left after you burn away all the extra stuff?
The purity that is left is the essential nature, as it were, of, in this case, the plant or the stone or whatever you're working with. It is those three elements that make up being in the world, purified from all of the leftover stuff, all of the extraneous, all of the crud that is clinging to it. And it produces some really powerful effects as a plant medicine. This is how I first learned this back in the 1970s, for God's sakes. Doing alchemically based plant extractions produced very, very powerful medicines. Some on par with anything you could get today. The first thing that I ever extracted was actually from Milicia. It was making the alchemical extract of lemon balm, and it was a pretty powerful nootropic. It sharpened your awareness. It made you more alert, and it made you relaxed. It was not anxiety producing. Of course, the most interesting that I ever did, which I can tell you now because I'm living in Oakland and it's legal here, is the alchemical stone of the psilocybin mushroom. Yeehaw.
Cool.
Yeah.
Sounds like quite a process, though.
It's quite a process. It takes quite a while. You have to put the element through a number of different processes to do the extractions correctly, and then to do the purifications, and then do the recombinations. Yeah, it's not something that you can do in a day.
Doesn't sound like it. And likewise, purifying the self is not something you can do in a day.
No. But this point 7, is that work of the purification. And at point 7, you are recombining the elements that you have separated. The body, the mind, the emotions are the 3 elements there. The body is the salt. The emotions are the sulfur, and the mind is the mercury. And you have broken those down through this process. And now at point 7, you are recombining them into the medicine of metals, the philosopher's stone, all of this wonderful stuff that the philosophers, that the alchemists talked about. And what you get at this point is very, very high functioning. For those times when you can touch this place, it's pretty profound. So I highly recommend it. So there we have it. There is a quick discussion of the 7 lines of the work based on my early work with Mr. Bennett. And we are now open to any questions or answers.
I noticed that one of the things that you didn't mention, which I think a lot of people subsume under the concept of purity, and something which I have trouble with, because I think it was, is this freedom from concepts, freedom from language, and I'm ambivalent about that, because I'm not at all sure we want to be free of language. I think we want to understand the power of language and the power of conceptualization, but not necessarily dispense with it. But that's not what you're talking about.
No, I'm not talking about that. This is what, if you want to operate on this plane of existence, you need some sort of symbol system.
Right.
You do. I'm sorry. And there are times where you get beyond the level of language, but you don't want to hang out there. I can think of hitting that point maybe a handful of times in my life where I have slipped beyond linguistic symbolizing of my reality. And each time was very interesting. A couple of them involved massive amounts of DMT, because that's the easy way to get there. But you don't want to hang out there.
Why is that?
But it is useful, it seems to me, to see the effect of the way the language cuts up the world into pieces and that there are alternative ways of cutting it up. I mean, that,
Yes. That's useful. And the why is because if you are in that state, you cannot communicate with your environment
Mm-hmm.
or the people in it. You have stepped beyond that in a really odd and interesting way. And you know, I found the state interesting. I'm not looking for it again. I don't need to go there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, as long as I'm on this plane of existence and dealing with people, language is a very useful tool.
but it seems to be very much disparaged in certain circles. You know,
Yeah, it's like reason. It's the same sort of thing. Yeah. But we want to be masters of language rather than the language being masters of us.
Yeah, which I think is, I mean, when we encounter people pushing back against language, ultimately, I think that's what's really the issue being addressed, is that language can control us, and it is good to push back against that.
Yeah, and at this state, at the level of purity, language is no longer controlling you like it does, say, for us now.
Cool.
Yeah. So there we have it.
Any additional thoughts or questions or opinions? I like to make space for opinions.
Yeah. We like your opinions. Tell us your opinions.
How you feeling, David? I'm calling on you.
Can you do another example for number 6?
6 is submission.
Yeah, the classic thing that I tell people that I stole from Adyashanti on how to meditate. You've probably heard me say this, and if not, I will say it again. And I have to give him credit because he is the guy who came up with this particular description, which is allow everything to be as it already is. That's a perfect example of submission.
Yep.
Submission is resisting nothing that is.
Zainab needs to take off. Sorry to interrupt. She's
All right, Zainab, goodbye. Thank you for coming.
Bye.
Take
Thank
care.
you. See you.
She says thank you for the talk too. But onward.
Onward.
So yeah, I mean, being comfortable with what is can be very challenging. And I think that if one is going to submit to anything, that's probably the number one thing.
Yeah. Don't submit to people. Submitting to people is not good.
But being comfortable with what is doesn't exclude being willing to change what is. Right?
Oh yeah. It's
No.
just, you know, coming to grips with it makes change possible.
Exactly.
Yeah, you cannot change something unless you allow it to exist first, if that makes sense.
It's hard to respond to it in a functional way without accepting it. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yep. Cool.
So any more questions?
Not that could be handled in the next 10 minutes. I'll
Okay.
refine myself.
In that case, I am going to stop the recording and thank you everybody for being there. Same commercials as every time. You get to talk with, you get to have one-on-one stuff with us at a special discount rate for your first 6 times out, if you want it. And the rate is half price, which is $300 for 6 hours worth of one-on-one training. Right now, you get it with me. Very, very soon, you can choose Kyle instead of me, which I have to say is probably more fun. So that's all coming up. And we have more classes coming, and soon there is going to be the announcement of something incredibly cool that I'm not going to tell you about. I'm just going to make you curious about what it is so that you'll be wondering every day until we tell you what is this incredibly cool thing that he is talking about that they are going to announce that you are going to get an opportunity to do. So with that said, thanks, and we will see you next week.